stuff that in his mouth. Shut him up!
The boy tried with all his strength to stop a tragedy from happening, yet his companions still pulled the trigger in the name of revenge. With the gunshot ringing out, a living, breathing life vanished in an instant. Just as the boy stepped forward to comfort his companion, they were suddenly surrounded by German soldiers who rushed in after hearing the noise. The companion seized the moment and fled the scene ahead of everyone else. The boy,
Romek, run!
however, was so terrified by the ferocious German soldiers that he froze in place, staring in shock, unable to move. And just when he believed death was unavoidable, the German officer calmly took the pistol from his stiff, trembling hand.
The boy is robbing the Jews.
Although the boy was so frightened that he could not utter a single word from start to finish, the German officer became intensely intrigued by the little troublemaker in front of him, and decided to take the boy out for a drive, to show him the sights. And so, like a prized trophy, the boy was taken away by the German officer. What followed nearly twisted the boy's mind to the point of collapse, because in that moment, he abandoned the world, betrayed himself, and did everything solely to survive. Yes, to survive. That was also the only reason he had moved from the city to the countryside. But the beginning of this story goes back to the moment when the boy's father demanded that he recite Catholic prayers all day long.
Does the Holy Communion really taste like blood and flesh?
The boy's name was Romek. He had grown up in a well-off family, but ever since the Germans occupied Poland, the entire family had been living on the edge of danger. In order to stay alive, his father ultimately chose to send Romek to the countryside to live with a close friend, hoping to escape Nazi persecution. After that, his father insisted that Romek memorize Catholic prayers, disguise himself as a Catholic believer, and comforted him by saying that God would forgive all of this. Accustomed to living with his parents, Romek was deeply unwilling to leave their warm protection. Even though it broke their hearts to see their son crying uncontrollably, his parents still hardened their resolve, because to survive, they had to separate. Due to the German curfew, and to ensure safety, the father's close friend arrived earlier than planned, bringing baptism certificates for the family so that Romek's Jewish identity could be concealed. Once everything was ready, Romek was disguised as a sack of potatoes and loaded onto a horse-drawn cart. Yet even so, they were still stopped and searched by the Nazis along the way. Fortunately, a Jewish man who tried to break through the checkpoint was shot by German soldiers in the street, diverting their attention and allowing Romek to slip through by sheer luck. But even after reaching the entrance of the village, Romek remained so tense that he could not speak. Even when he encountered the village priest, he dared not offer a single greeting, terrified that he might expose his Jewish identity. What he did not know was that the priest standing before him was the very man who had issued the baptism certificate for his family. In other words, apart from his father's close friend, the only person in the entire village who knew his true identity was this kind-hearted priest. But in a sparsely populated village, even the slightest anomaly could attract the attention of the neighbors, just like this neighbor, Kluba, who seemed to sense something unusual in the air and eagerly stepped forward to strike up a conversation with warm enthusiasm.
Hello, neighbor.
Hello.
You have a visitor?
Yes, this is my wife's cousin's son. They lost their house in a bombing. He's going to stay with us for a few months.
Although it was nothing more than a perfectly crafted lie, listening to it made Romek feel a quiet warmth in his heart. From that moment on, Romek's identity in the village was established. However, newly arrived in the countryside, Romek felt unfamiliar with everything around him. Even the two sons of his father's friend saw him as an intruder trying to take over their territory. Even when Romek helped the older brother out at the dinner table by covering for him when he forgot the prayer, it still did not earn him acceptance. By contrast, the younger brother, Tolo, quickly developed a fondness for Romek, and even whispered to him about how their father secretly raised pigs at home behind the Germans' backs. But Romek's presence brought enormous hidden risk to this family. At that time, even secretly raising a single pig was enough to result in a death sentence, let alone hiding a Jewish child in the house. Even so, Romek still mustered his courage and tried his best to blend in with the local children, playing, laughing, and studying alongside them. Yet he was often rejected and mocked. There was even one time when the older brother locked him inside the pigsty. Although there were conflicts between the two of them, they were nothing too serious. With Tolo mediating in the middle, their relationship gradually eased. But beyond that, what frightened Romek even more was his first time stepping into a Catholic church. He had to sit together with all the village children and listen to the priest's scripture readings and sermons. Most importantly, the priest deliberately invited him to join the children's baptism classes. On the surface, This was meant to help their spiritual growth, but in truth, it was to encourage Romek to integrate into his new life as soon as possible and shed his fear and timidity. This kind-hearted priest knew very well that Romek was a Jewish child hiding here, yet a priest filled with compassion could offer spring-like comfort to children, but could not soften the cruelty of the Nazis in the slightest. One day, an elderly couple in the village was accused on the spot for secretly raising livestock. The priest rushed over upon hearing the news and pleaded desperately, but in the end, he only endured humiliation.
Officer, please, take the pigs and forgive them.
Catch me these pigs.
What?
Catch me these pigs. For every pig you catch, you save one life. I'll give you 1 minute for each one. Begin.
The children saw all of this with their own eyes, and the pain cut deeply into their hearts. The priest whipped his own bare back, attempting to achieve spiritual purification through physical suffering. After that, he devoted even more energy to the village children, hoping they would pierce through the darkness and one day see the sunlight. To deepen the children's understanding of the faith, the priest also arranged a game, asking each child to choose a disciple to learn from and transform themselves into that disciple. However, after Tolo chose to imitate Jesus, he began to display a series of strange ideas. One day, fueled by alcohol, Kluba barged into the courtyard and spoke with thinly veiled threats toward the father's close friend.
Sure, you are not doing something stupid that could get us all killed. Where are you?
Okay, let's go!
A few days later, the father's friend told his wife that Kluba had been watching their secret pig farming for a long time. Now, for the sake of the family's safety, they had no choice but to agree to his demands and decide to sell the illegally raised white pig. They thought that once this matter was settled, the whole family could finally live in peace. But unexpectedly, tragedy still struck. Early the next morning, in the pouring rain,
Get up! Get up! Feed your children!
Mama, please stop!
No!
I don't know what happened. Guess you left with the man who bought the pig. I waited for hours. Then I went to look for him, and some people told me the Germans shot somebody.
the wife clutched her husband's body, devastated by grief. Losing both the person and their livelihood plunged the entire family into unbearable sorrow. On the day of the burial, Tolo did not say a single word from morning to night, but that evening, he did something extremely strange. He stripped naked and screamed wildly in the torrential rain, and no one could stop him. Still trapped in the pain of losing her husband, the mother suddenly exploded with emotion and scolded Romek without distinction, declaring that taking care of Tolo was the only condition and the only reason Romek was allowed to stay in this household. Even though Tolo explained that it had nothing to do with Romek, his mother still harshly drove him away. In the heavy rain, with nowhere to go, Romek went to the home of his older playmate. Lying beside her, Romek felt warmth and comfort, yet he could not help but miss his own mother. However, early the next morning, the older brother hurried over to call Romek back. It turned out that after a night of turmoil, the younger brother had inevitably been struck down by the storm. Although bedridden, he still hoped that all his playmates would stay by his side. Seeing Romek return after being away all night, the mother stepped forward to apologize to him. They thought that the grief-stricken Tolo had finally calmed down, but unexpectedly, he proposed an even stranger idea. He firmly believed that as long as he became Jesus, he could bring back his own father and Romek's father. He was not even afraid of being nailed to a tree, because he was convinced that only through his suffering could life become better. In order to help Tolo recover as soon as possible, all the children encouraged him, saying he was doing the right thing. One night, Romek noticed Kluba's son, Nishio, sneaking around outside the window, acting suspiciously. The older brother beside him only said they had gone to watch the trains, and explained nothing else. But Romek already sensed that the truth behind this must be chilling to the bone. At that very moment, he felt as if he had been watched all along. A few days later, one boy withdrew from the childish game that revolved around indulging Tolo. Despite Tolo's sorrowful attempts to keep him, he was met with ridicule and mockery, and Romek, who stepped forward to defend Tolo, was also blamed and criticized.
And you should be on those trains!
So that very night, unable to endure the spreading rumors, Romek finally made up his mind to leave, for no other reason, except to survive. However, when he encountered a mysterious passing train and saw what looked like Jewish people jumping off to escape. Romek suddenly realized that perhaps there was no longer any place in this world for Jews to belong. By comparison, he was already fortunate. At least he had companions to play with and comfort from a kind-hearted priest. So he returned to the village. When Romek prepared to tell the priest everything, he uncovered a shocking secret.
A man in town said Knieto never sold him the pig.
He's a liar!
He said another man sold him the pig. A man with a big mustache like you.
What are you going to do? Rattle me?
It turned out that Kluba had murdered the father's close friend. What terrified Romek even more was that this murderous neighbor had long known that he was Jewish, and knew perfectly well that it was the priest who had arranged everything. Seeing Romek cowering in a corner, trembling with fear, the priest instantly understood everything. He comforted Romek, telling him that although he was Jewish, God had already accepted his devotion, and that he would forever receive blessing and love. Then the priest shared fragments of the consecrated bread with Romek, a sign that he would be protected within the Lord's embrace. But Romek told the priest that he had seen the train passing through the village in the dead of night, and that he knew his father and mother would never come back for him. At that moment, the kind-hearted priest was left without words. The sorrowful Romek returned to the cellar and quietly packed away the stones he used to count the days. Just then, the older brother's mother came to his side. From a mother's perspective, her heart ached deeply for the lost and broken Romek. From that day on, Romek never mentioned his parents again. However, Tolo took it upon himself to redeem their fathers, because he believed he was Jesus. For reasons unknown, the other children actually agreed to his request and tied him to a tree. Just like Jesus, perhaps none of them had the heart to shatter the last remnants of Tolo's obsession, yet their actions were met with ridicule and mockery from Nishio. Facing the tall and imposing Nishio, they were angry but powerless. The failed redemption left Tolo utterly heartbroken.
Now Papa is never coming back. Killed him, bloody!
Late at night, Romek and the older brother once again saw Nishio moving hurriedly toward the direction where the train passed. This time, Romek decided to find out the truth. What he witnessed next reignited the fury in his heart. Jewish people who had jumped from the roaring train were just about to flee when Nishio blocked their path with an axe in hand.
Stop! Where are you going?
What do you want?
You'll tell your story at the police station.
Seeing Nishio robbing them with a weapon, the older brother behaved with visible cowardice. In that moment, Romek could not help but tell him the truth about how his father had been killed.
Kluba killed your father.
What?
I overheard Kluba arguing with the priest. The priest went to town and found out it was Kluba who sold the pig.
After learning the truth, the older brother left silently, his eyes filled with hatred. The next day, during the church offering, Nishio smugly placed a ring onto the tray. No one expected that a casual question and answer between the girl in the back
Your matters.
Somebody's matters.
row and Romek would ultimately lead to a shocking tragedy. After the church service ended, Romek told the girl the truth about the ring, and the two of them hurried home. Halfway there, they were still intercepted by Nishio. After a violent beating that still failed to satisfy his rage, Nishio threw Romek into the baptismal pool, and then committed an inhumane act against the unconscious girl. Pulled out of the water by the older brother, Romek felt overwhelming relief. But the girl, deeply wounded in both body and spirit, could only submerge herself in water, trying to wash away the humiliation. At that moment, the fire of rage in the older brother's heart was completely ignited.
Be careful, son. You have your mother to take care of. And Tolo. And Romek. Your father would be proud of you.
That night, the older brother took Romek back to the place where the train passed. This time, he brought along the pistol left behind by his father. As expected, they once again encountered Nishio in the middle of a robbery. What was destined to happen finally came to pass.
Hey, Roman!
The older brother aimed the gun at Nishio, only to be met with contempt.
You're not going to shoot.
What Nishio did not realize was that the fury in the older brother's chest had already reached its breaking point. Before Nishio could move closer, he fired a bullet fueled by rage. As Nishio fell to the ground after being shot, Romek failed to stop his brother from pulling the trigger again.
We have no father. Your father will have no son.
The stunned Romek took the gun from his brother's hand, but in the next instant, German soldiers alerted by the noise surrounded him. Fortunately, the older brother reacted quickly enough to escape. leaving only Romek standing frozen like a wooden statue, gripping the pistol tightly. This is the very moment where the story began. Taken back to the camp by the Germans, Romek indeed received the reward promised by the German officer. He was taken for a ride and shown the sights, yet all of it cut into Romek's heart like a knife. On the grass, a group of Jewish people were chased and scattered by the motorcycle Romek was riding, cheers and screams mixing together, like a master toying with helpless pets. But this was only the German officer's appetizer. Next, he showed off his prey to his superior and invited him to watch a performance. The German officer grabbed Romek by the arm.
When I say go, you do the same thing you did in the forest, right? Come with me. Romek, go!
With a single command, Romek was forced into a corner with no escape. At last, he pointed the gun at his own people. In that moment, he was completely at a loss, not knowing how to begin, nor how to end. Suddenly, Nishio's past actions flashed through his mind. With no other choice, Romek could only reenact Nishio's methods.
Take your shoes off!
Sure enough, it worked. Searching inside the heels of the Jewish prisoner's shoes, Romek finally found something of value. Immediately after, he was praised by the German officer. He thought that surviving this ordeal would allow him to escape, but unexpectedly, he heard his brother's voice in the distance, as he was being driven into the Jewish lineup. At the critical moment, Romek reported to the German officer that the boy was his companion from the previous night and not Jewish, but the cunning Germans only let him go after pulling down his pants and finding no sign of circumcision. At this point, both Romek and his brother survived, which seemed like a fortunate ending. However, no one expected that another sorrowful chapter was only just beginning. Tolo, who had been secretly following them, suddenly crawled over the tracks and rushed into the group of Jewish people boarding the train. Just as Romek ran forward to stop him, he was held back by a German soldier.
What do you think you're doing, huh?
The blonde boy!
That boy?
Yes, that's my brother!
Come here.
Do you know this boy? Tell me, do you know him?
Hello!
This boy says he is your brother. Is he?
Hello!
Tolo silently shook his head, a gesture powerful enough to shatter the heart. In his dim eyes, there was nothing but resignation. In the end, Tolo was carried onto the train of death, perhaps until his final moment. He firmly believed that only through his own suffering could he save his father, and give his mother and brothers a better life. So he chose Jesus, he chose suffering, and he chose death. As the train disappeared into the distance, only Romek's helpless cries remained, along with the fading silhouettes of the Nazis. The war finally ended, and Romek survived. But the pain the war inflicted on people was forever etched deep into memory. At the place where Romek once fell into the water, his brother smashed the pistol to pieces, because he despised this cruel and merciless war with all his heart. The film reaches its conclusion here. Inside the church, bathed in warm sunlight, Romek received communion together with the other children. As a Jewish boy, Romek once again received only the leftover fragments of the consecrated bread. In fact, this was a deliberate arrangement by the compassionate priest, because it represented both inclusion and profound respect for Romek's faith. At this moment, Romek's silent gaze was filled with gratitude for the kind priest, and for all those who had helped him and allowed him to survive. It was they who helped him understand who he was, and where he came from. War is forever a terrifying word. It not only destroys the world of adults, but also suffocates the survival and growth of children. Lying on grass that had been scorched by gunfire yet still thrived with life, Romek slowly stood up and walked toward the future he longed for. I am a film enthusiast. Thank you for subscribing to my channel, and I will see you next time.